Hey guys, welcome back. I'm going to do another video on the testosterone replacement therapy that I've been undergoing. As you guys know that have been watching some of this playlist, I started on TRT probably about 9 months ago now, something like that. I went through a private company in the UK called Optimale. I had very low testosterone levels. I was feeling very tired. I had a number of unpleasant side effects that were affecting my lifestyle and my enjoyment of life basically. So I went and got tested, found that I was low, got onto the TRT, and if you look back on the playlist, I'll chuck a link in the description. You can see kind of from start to finish the testing and all the stuff I went through. In this video, because I've covered pretty much everything, nothing's really changed. In this video I'm going to go through the pros and cons of TRT for people in general. So you might have been asking yourself, should I take testosterone? You may be a young person that's considering testosterone for maybe the wrong reasons. You might be a person like me who's getting a little bit older. I'm just approaching 50 and you're thinking, you know, my lifestyle isn't as good as it could be. I could be enjoying myself more. Is it right for me? So I'm going to try and put that into a kind of easy to digest form factor for you guys, you know. So I'll just give you some kind of quick pros and cons to the way I see testosterone replacement therapy. So I think the first and most important thing is if you have got low testosterone, in all likelihood you're going to see massive benefits in terms of lifestyle. You know, that's a real positive. For me, I was feeling tired, my gym performance was suffering. It felt like I was kind of pushing myself to go to the gym, almost dragging myself off the sofa in the evening. If you're someone that's finishing a day of work and you're just kind of glued to the sofa, you know, you can't be bothered to do anything, you're not motivated to do any hobbies or anything productive at all, and you're kind of dozing off, maybe you've got low testosterone. And the issue with that is you're not getting the most out of life that you could be. You know, I really enjoy going to the gym, I enjoy doing lots of different hobbies, and I want to feel like I've got the motivation and the energy to do those. So my enjoyment of life in general has greatly increased. That's a positive for sure. Now a negative, this isn't a cure. You know, people have kind of said, okay, great, I'll take this and then everything's fine and then I'll stop taking it. That's a real downside to testosterone replacement therapy. It is a replacement therapy, right? It's not a cure for a problem. So really, unless you've got low testosterone as a result of something you're really doing wrong in your lifestyle choices. So it's possible, for example, someone who was drinking far too much alcohol, someone who was like eating complete junk food and leading a very sedentary lifestyle, basically being incredibly unhealthy, they might be able to get their testosterone fixed, if you like, by actually making very healthy lifestyle choices. That could be an option for them. But there isn't really a medical way to treat that in terms of fixing it. You know, you're either going to make those lifestyle choices and fix it that way, or it might be that, like me, you're genetically inclined to have low testosterone levels, and therefore you're going to have to do something medical about it, which is to replace those levels. So it's a bit like being diabetic, that if you give a diabetic some insulin, that will help that diabetic who can't make the insulin, but he will have to keep taking that on a regular basis. It's not going to suddenly make him start producing it himself. The same thing goes with testosterone. If I stop taking the testosterone therapy, my levels will be maybe worse than what they were when I started, because my body's probably shut down from all production by now. And that is something you would also have to consider if you were taking testosterone as a recreational gym goer, you know, that you just wanted to have it for its aesthetic qualities. Maybe you were taking dosages that were far outside of the normal range for muscular benefit. Then if you've got a healthy testosterone production to start with, you're going to completely shut that down by taking testosterone like this. And that's not going to be good. You know, it may take months, even sometimes years, to get it back to normal levels. It may never come back to normal levels. That might be unusual, but it's certainly possible. And the process of going through that very low testosterone stage and waiting for your levels to naturally come back again is going to be hellish. You know, if you felt already lack of motivation and kind of a bit down in the dumps to start with, if your levels are at 0 for several months, that's going to be a really, really horrible several months. So I wouldn't recommend people go through that if they don't need to. And then that kind of leads us on to another thing. If this is something that's ongoing and you have to keep doing, there's a cost attributed to it. You might be lucky enough to get really good treatment on the NHS, and it's a cheap alternative for you maybe, but many of us will be paying a private clinic like I do, because they have probably, I would argue, enhanced levels of testing and enhanced levels of what they can administer to you and the kind of customer care levels that they're giving. But that all costs money. It cost me around about £60 a month, so it isn't cheap. And that's something I'm going to have to do for the rest of my life, you know, or I'm going to have to put up with having low testosterone levels again. So I'd rather not do that, but this is going to be an ongoing situation. It might be something that I end up going to the NHS and seeing if I can, you know, do a cheaper option through them, like a prescription payment rather than paying a private company. But the state of the NHS at the moment, I would say that's kind of unlikely for me in the foreseeable future. If you're concerned about finances, it might be something you simply cannot afford. If you have an insecure job position and you don't know what's going to be happening next month or in the next 6 months, this might not be a good thing to start at all, because you're obviously going to start, you're going to be able to make the payments, everything's going well, and then you're going to have to suddenly stop. And as we just mentioned, you're going to have to go through that period of having very low testosterone. Some people have said, you know, they wouldn't do the NHS route and they wouldn't do a private clinic route, but they would consider taking some kind of black or grey market testosterone that they will administer themselves. That is absolutely fraught with problems, because first and foremost, you're probably not going to bother getting your bloods tested if you do it that way. You're obviously not going to know the exact dosage of your stuff that you're taking, because it's probably not been properly regulated. The chances are it's like an underground lab version which has been cooked up by someone, or it's a stolen pharmaceutical grade or a faked pharmaceutical grade, much more likely to be a faked pharmaceutical grade, in which case it might be a completely inert substance, it might be an incorrectly dosed substance, and it might be a completely different substance. It's very common in these situations for various different steroids to be swapped around, you know, whatever the underground lab has to get rid of that they've got in stock that they're trying to sell, they're going to just put a sticker on that and tell you it's testosterone. It could be any number of different steroids, some of which are going to be dangerous for your health. You know, they're going to affect your liver and kidneys and stuff. So it's really important to know what you're getting. It's also vitally important to get your blood levels checked. And if you can't do those two things, really I would suggest it's a pretty bad idea. So unless your best friend happens to be a pharmacist and lives in a country that is completely legal to supply you with this stuff, and you can guarantee with surety that it's the right thing, then I would avoid that like the plague. Another downside of testosterone would be side effects. That's why it's so important to have your blood levels checked. The side effects could range from the mild, you know, you might get some hair loss, you could get things like gynecomastia, or the starting of that, where you've got these sort of itchy nipples, which is basically too much estrogen is being converted in the body, through to more serious side effects like cardiovascular damage and, you know, HDL and LDL levels being thrown out. So you start getting sort of arterial problems, very significant problems, you know, liver or kidney issues. If you're not getting blood tests to stay on top of this, all those things are a possibility. The private clinic is going to monitor you and monitor your side effects to make sure they've got you at the kind of most reasonable dose that's giving you the effect, the therapeutic effect you want, which is to have a good testosterone level and a good quality of life, but obviously without any of the side effects that are going to do you damage. Now, equally, we should note that it's also very dangerous to have very low testosterone levels for a period of time. Not only does that feel very depressing and very unpleasant for the individual, but it has significant health effects as well, and that can ultimately lead to people dying at a younger age. So there's arguments for both. You know, it's not good to have low test levels, and it's also not good to have ridiculously high test levels or unmonitored test levels. So that's something we should be aware of. And moving back towards one of the benefits, if like me you're a gym goer, you will no doubt see some benefits. This puts you in a category for like a 20 to 30-year-old male at the higher end of the range. So as a 50-year-old guy, or just coming up to 50, I probably wouldn't be able to attain those levels naturally. So it is keeping me within the bounds that would be normal for a human male, but a human male that's probably younger than me. So for that reason, it's great for the gym, because it means I can go into the gym, I can feel really motivated, I can hit some PBs. You know, I'm doing pretty well on my benches at the moment. I think I'm back to benching about 150 kilos. So that's not too bad for a 50-year-old guy. I'm pretty easy on the squats and deadlifts just because I've got a couple of compressions in my back, so I don't really want to make that worse, but I'm certainly strong enough that I could start getting in some bigger numbers if I didn't have that injury. I'm in pretty good shape. You know, I've got you know, decent physique at the moment for my age. I'm very happy with that. My partner's very happy with that. So in those terms, it's a real benefit, and you feel very confident. You know, when you look good, you feel good, and obviously being on the testosterone and having those higher levels, it does make you feel really good about yourself. So you kind of look at yourself in the mirror and think, yeah, you know, the body is where I want it to be, and you've got that feel good factor as well. Now on the downside, there's a downside to that, is that if you don't have self-control, because you've got the sort of levels that you would expect from like a 20 to 30-year-old male, you're also likely going to have their sex drive. Now that is a pro and a con, right? If you're a really decent guy and you're in a loving relationship with a girl that you really fancy, then great. That's going to be probably great news for both of you, because you're going to be having a lot of fun together. You're going to be feeling like you're kind of on a first date again. You know, you won't be able to leave her alone. She will probably be enjoying that. Now that could be the opposite, that actually she may be going through a menopause, for example, and she's not looking for extra attention, in which case you're going to get frustrated. She's going to get peed off that you're kind of always on about, you know, going off and doing some sexy stuff in the bedroom, and that could create arguments between a couple. So it's something you would have to discuss as a possibility between you both, maybe before you started this, because in all likelihood your sex drive is going to massively increase if you go from having very low test to a higher test. Also in that department, it might be worth telling your partner, she's probably going to notice changes in your genitals. So one of the misconceptions about this is, you know, blokes do testosterone and it shrinks their dick. That isn't true. What it actually does, it can make your testicles look smaller because you stop producing your own testosterone. Most women aren't, to be honest, that bothered about how big a guy's testicles look. They're more interested in how big his dick looks. And you will probably find that your dick looks a bit bigger for two reasons. Reason number one is if you become leaner and more muscular, then in all likelihood it's going to look bigger just based on fat loss, and testosterone will definitely help you lose some fat because it increases metabolism. If you're going down the gym and you're more motivated, you're obviously going to get into better shape. Number two, because you've got that extra level of arousal, when you actually get aroused, it's probably going to be a lot harder than it was before. So your partner might be really happy with that as well. And if you're someone who has had some issues, now it's not going to fix someone that's had like physical issues with erectile dysfunction. You know, if you've got a physical reason why you're not maintaining an erection, it's not going to do anything about that. But a lot of guys actually suffer from erectile dysfunction more because they're losing the interest. You know, they've lost that arousal within their mindset. If they get that back, then they find their erections come back as well, and obviously they're really solid, so that's going to make it look bigger too, and your partner might be really happy about that. But you know, that can go either way. Like I said, she might be also very unhappy about that. She might not want to wake up in the morning next to a guy who's got a huge hard-on. So check with her first. The other problem there in terms of relationships is that if you're maybe not that much of a nice guy, or you lack self-control, and you're in a serious relationship or a long-term relationship, you are going to find it really difficult, because suddenly when you're driving around and you see lots of pretty girls in the summer, you know, all walking down the street, you're going to look at those girls and you're going to be thinking, wow, they're super attractive. If you're out having a drink, you might be tempted to go up to one and ask her for a number or whatever. If you're successful, that's obviously going to lead to you deviating from your normal relationship. So, you know, it could cause guys to be a bit of a pain and be like wolf whistling out of windows and stuff, which is, you know, pretty uncouth behaviour. I don't really think that's a great idea. I wouldn't want my daughter to endure that as she walked down the street. Number two, it could lead to people being unfaithful. You know, there's an element of that for sure. So I think you should be aware of that before you start TRT, and just be really honest with yourself. You know, if your sex drive suddenly triples overnight, are you the kind of guy that can handle that, that's not going to kind of go around acting like a fool? And are you the kind of person that can stay faithful in a relationship? Now, the upside of a private clinic is they're going to have many, many methods by which you can administer the therapy, and probably the most successful method and the most consistent method is via injection. The downside is obviously injections. You know, people don't like the idea of that. It's intramuscular, so it's not like you're injecting yourself in a vein. You're not like a heroin addict would be, so you haven't got to go through all that, but you're still sticking a needle into yourself, and it's reasonably thick needle. You know, it's not like you would get with say a semaglutide pen or an insulin pen. Because it's an oil-based injection, it generally is a little bit of a thicker needle, so you have got to sort of bite the bullet there and get used to that. You might be able to get someone to help you. A lot of people might ask their partners to help them with the injection. The problem is that you're then completely reliant on that person to always be there. And it's very important that you inject this stuff on a regular basis, consistently. You know, if you're doing it every Monday and every Friday, that's going to keep your blood levels stable. Really, you want to do it like at least a couple of times a week. You know, split the dose so you haven't got this massive like peak of testosterone and then it's kind of dropping off at the end of the week. That might lead to side effects like acne and all the things we've already discussed. So we're going to try and keep the blood levels stable. That's going to mean, you know, like I said, at least 2 injections a week, and some people might be completely uncomfortable with that. And injections themselves can be uncomfortable. You know, that sometimes you get a little bit of mild pain in that area. It feels kind of bruised the next day, and some people might not even be able to handle that. You know, if you go down the gym the next day and you're working that body part, you might kind of notice it, and some people that they just won't want that added pain in their life. For me, I'm not too bothered. I've got a reasonable tolerance to pain, but it's certainly something to bear in mind. And the last thing I'd say is, if you are using the injectables, which as I've said are the most consistent option, generally the NHS would offer like patches and the kind of cheaper option with less liability for them, because there's no needles involved. They've got a lot of downsides. You know, the stuff can rub off. It can also rub off on other people, your partner or your children, and have negative side effects for them. Your partner might end up growing a beard and having a deep voice if you kept getting that testosterone from your skin onto theirs, for example. So that's got a lot of downsides as well. Some people just haven't got on with it at all. Some people find it gives them skin rashes, so I've avoided that completely and just gone the injection route. It's a lot easier to balance the blood levels via injection. The other downside to injections is that you might have to travel. You know, I've got to do international travel for work. Then you're moving about with syringes and injectable bottles and vials. That has a stigma attached to it, you know, and testosterone itself has a stigma attached to it, that if you're going through an airport and you have to explain to someone, yes, I've got this, you know, this is my injectable, I'm on testosterone therapy, they may immediately make a judgment that you're some kind of steroid abusing dude or whatever, and that could lead to ultimately some questions being thrown at you that are maybe feeling a little unpleasant, could add to your journey time. And the same thing goes for partners. You know, if you're single and you're doing this and then you meet a new partner, you're going to have to tell them about that at some point. You won't be able to keep it secret forever. They're going to find maybe the needles, and then they're going to think maybe that you're some kind of drug abuser. So that has its own stigma, and you'll have to decide for yourself if you're comfortable dealing with that. It may also be a problem for your work, you know, that you may have to then go into work and explain, hey, I'm taking this therapy. I'm not sure if it shows up in blood tests. I guess it would depend what you're doing. If you're a professional sportsman, it would definitely be an issue. I don't know for standardized jobs if it would come up in those, but it's certainly something worth consideration. So it's not a simple subject, you know, it's not just a, hey, I'm going to do this, let's jump on it. There's a lot to consider there. I hope this has given you some food for thought. Let me know what you're thinking about all this. If you have got on it and you are finding the benefits fantastic, maybe you've been on therapy and you've had some real negative side effects, let me know in the comments. Or you may not have tried it at all and you've just got an opinion one way or the other that you think it's a horrific idea. Also interested to hear from you. As always, keep it clean, keep it polite, and we'll hopefully have an interesting chat there. Thanks for watching, take care, and I'll catch you all next time.